There is a man whose name should stand alongside Patton and Montgomery, but doesn't. A tank commander who faced Germany's most feared ace in battle and won, but never claimed credit. 18 confirmed kills against Panzers, Tigers, and Panthers, more than any other Allied tank commander in the war, and yet history barely whispers his name. This is not a story about propaganda heroes or medals earned in parade formations. This is about a 24-year-old Canadian major who learned to kill German tanks in Normandy's killing fields, who understood that survival meant thinking faster than the enemy could aim, and who one August afternoon destroyed the legend of invincibility that surrounded Hitler's armored elite. What follows is not speculation. Every detail is documented, every engagement recorded, every death counted. But the question remains: how does a young officer with almost no combat experience survive when 5 out of every 6 Sherman tanks around him burn? The answer lies in the fields of France, in the mathematics of armor penetration, and in the terrible calculus of men fighting inside steel coffins. The Sherman tank was a death trap, and everyone who climbed into one knew it. The statistics were brutal and undeniable. Allied intelligence reports from Normandy documented the loss ratios with clinical precision. For every German Panzer knocked out, the Allies lost 5 Shermans. Against Tigers and Panthers, the numbers grew worse. The Sherman's 75mm gun could not penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at any practical combat range. A Panther could be killed only from the side or rear, and only if the shot struck true. Meanwhile, the German 88mm gun on a Tiger could punch through a Sherman's frontal plate at 2,000 yards, and the Panther's long-barreled 75 could do the same at 1,500. The Sherman weighed 33 tons. The Tiger weighed 56. The Sherman's armor was 50mm at its thickest point. The Tiger's was 100mm on the front, sloped for maximum deflection. German tank crews had been fighting since Poland in 1939, since France in 1940, since the endless hell of the Eastern Front. They knew range estimation instinctively, could calculate deflection angles in seconds, understood how to use terrain and patience to turn every engagement into an ambush. American and British tank crews trained for months, then crossed the channel and died in minutes. The Sherman had one advantage: numbers. The factories in Detroit and Pittsburgh could produce them faster than Germany could destroy them. But that calculation meant nothing to the men inside. When a German shell penetrated a Sherman's armor, the temperature inside the fighting compartment could reach 3,000 degrees in under 2 seconds. Ammunition cooked off. Gasoline ignited. Men burned alive or died from hydrostatic shock before they could reach the hatches. Crews gave the phenomenon a name that sounded almost cheerful: brewing up. A Sherman brewed up the way tea brewed in a kettle, quickly and completely. The British added another term, Ronson, after the cigarette lighter company whose slogan promised it would light the first time, every time. Dark humor was the only kind available. Sydney Radley-Walters understood all of this on June 7, 1944, the day after D-Day, when he climbed into a Sherman named Caribou and took command of a tank squadron in the Sherbrooke Fusiliers Regiment, part of the 2nd Canadian Armoured Brigade. He was 24 years old. He had trained on tanks in England for 2 years but had never fired a shot in combat. His commission came through accelerated wartime promotion, not battlefield experience. He was tall and lean with dark hair and steady hands, and his men watched him carefully during those first days because they needed to know if their new commander would keep them alive or get them killed through inexperience. Leadership in armored warfare was not theoretical. It was measured in survival time. Normandy in June was not the France of paintings or postcards. It was a landscape of small fields divided by hedgerows, ancient earthen walls covered with trees and thick brush, some of them 12 feet high and so densely grown that a tank could not push through. Every field was a compartment, every hedgerow a potential ambush line. The Germans understood this terrain intimately. They positioned their Panthers and Tigers in tree lanes at field edges, their hulls concealed, only their turrets and guns visible, waiting for Shermans to nose into the open. At 400 yards, a German gunner had all the time he needed. At 200 yards, he could choose where to place his shot. Turret, hull, tracks, ammunition storage. The kill was certain. The only question was whether the crew would have time to bail out. Radley-Walters learned by watching men die. He watched a Sherman 30 yards to his left take an 88mm round through the glassy plate, the frontal armor, and saw the turret lift 6 inches off its ring before settling back down, smoke pouring from every opening. He watched another Sherman try to reverse after taking a hit to the tracks, its crew frantically trying to abandon while machine gun fire from German infantry raked the hull. He watched a tank explode so violently that pieces of its armor landed 200 feet away, and he never learned how many men had been inside or whether any of them survived. These deaths taught him things that training never could. That speed was survival, that movement meant life, that sitting still invited death, that the Germans would always see him before he saw them unless he changed the equation. His first kill came in the 3rd week of June, near the town of Christot, west of Cannes. The engagement lasted less than 90 seconds. Radley-Walters had positioned Caribou behind a stone farmhouse, using the structure to mask his silhouette while his gunner, a corporal from Montreal named Levesque, scanned the tree line 600 yards distant. The radio crackled with reports of German armor moving up from the south. Exact numbers unknown, types uncertain. Radley-Walters ordered his driver to edge forward just enough to give Levesque a clear line of sight while keeping most of the Sherman's hull in defilade, hidden behind the farmhouse foundation. The waiting stretched time. Seconds felt like minutes. Then Levesque said one word: contact. The Panzer IV appeared at the tree line, moving left to right, its commander visible in the open cupola hatch, scanning for targets. The German tank was perhaps 400 yards out, moving at walking speed, confident or careless or both. Levesque tracked it for 3 seconds, calculating lead and drop, then fired. The 75mm round struck the Panzer IV on the turret side, not a frontal penetration but a flank shot, and the effect was immediate. The German tank stopped moving. Smoke began pouring from the engine deck. The cupola hatch flew open and 2 men climbed out, then a third, all of them moving with the slow, dreamlike quality of men in shock. Radley-Walters did not order a second shot. The Panzer was dead. His crew was out. Killing them served no purpose. But killing the tank did. That Panzer IV would not kill Allied infantry tonight. It would not ambush another Sherman tomorrow. Its gun was silent. Its crew dispersed. Its steel bulk nothing more than an obstacle on a battlefield that would grind forward whether Germany wanted it to or not. Radley-Walters felt no exhilaration, no triumph, only a sense of cold confirmation that what he had theorized might work actually did work. Stay hidden until the enemy commits, take the flank shot, move immediately after firing because the Germans will have marked your position and their next round is already on the way. Caribou reversed behind the farmhouse 10 seconds after Levesque's shot, relocated 200 yards north, and went to ground again. No German counterfire struck anywhere near their position. The pattern repeated through June and into July. Radley-Walters refined his tactics with each engagement, learning how to read terrain the way a sniper reads wind. He understood that German tank commanders expected Allied armor to move in predictable lines, following roads, crossing fields in open formation, presenting themselves as targets. So he did the opposite. He used sunken lanes, moved along tree lanes instead of across open ground, positioned his tanks where German doctrine said tanks should not be. He began coordinating ambushes, positioning multiple Shermans to create crossfire zones where a German tank would face threats from 2 directions simultaneously, forcing their commander to choose which threat to address first, a choice that usually meant death from the second. He learned that German crews, for all their experience and superior equipment, had patterns too. They preferred to fight at long range where their guns had maximum advantage. They would reposition if they missed their first shot, but often to the same alternate firing position because terrain limited options. They expected Allied tanks to fight like the Soviets fought. Mass charges, overwhelming numbers, accepting catastrophic losses to achieve breakthrough. When Radley-Walters refused to fight that way, when he made the Germans come to him or forced them to expose themselves to get a shot, the advantage shifted slightly but measurably. His squadron lost tanks anyway. The mathematics of attrition were inescapable. A lieutenant named Morrison died when his Sherman took a high-explosive round to the turret from a concealed 75mm anti-tank gun. Not even a tank, just 3 German soldiers in a tree line with a gun and a good position. A sergeant named Black burned to death when his Sherman was hit from behind by a Panzerfaust, a handheld shape-charge rocket fired by German infantry at 30 yards range. close enough that Black's crew never saw the enemy who killed them. Radley-Walters attended no funerals because there was no time and often no bodies. The dead were listed, reported, replaced. New crews arrived from England, young men with fresh uniforms and uncertain eyes, and Radley-Walters taught them the same lessons he had learned. Move fast, shoot first, never assume safety, never stop thinking 3 moves ahead. In late July, the Sherman Firefly arrived. It looked like a standard Sherman from 50 yards away, but the gun gave it away immediately. A long, brutal 17-pounder, the British quick-firing anti-tank gun that could kill a Tiger from the front at 1,000 yards and a Panther at 1,200. The Firefly had been a desperate improvisation, shoehorning a gun designed for towed artillery carriages into a turret designed for something much smaller. The result was cramped, awkward, and lethal. German tank commanders knew about Fireflies and feared them, which meant they targeted Fireflies first in any engagement. British and Canadian tank squadrons learned to camouflage their Fireflies, to hide them among standard Shermans, to keep them out of sight until the moment came to kill German heavy armor. A standard Sherman squadron had 1 Firefly among 4 regular Shermans. That single tank was the squadron's only reliable defense against Tigers and Panthers. If the Firefly died first, the rest of the squadron had to run or die. Radley-Walters received 2 Fireflies for his squadron. He positioned them with obsessive care, never in the lead, never exposed, always with clear firing lanes and covered approaches for withdrawal. He instructed his Firefly commanders to ignore everything except German heavy armor. Let the standard Shermans handle Panzer IVs and infantry support. The Fireflies existed for one purpose: killing Tigers and Panthers before those tanks could kill the squadron. This doctrine saved lives, including Radley-Walters' own, more times than anyone counted. By August, Normandy had become a butcher's yard. The landscape was cratered and burned, villages reduced to rubble, roads torn to pieces by tank treads and artillery fire. The Germans fought for every hedgerow, every village, every worthless piece of mud, because they knew that losing Normandy meant losing France, and losing France meant losing the war. But they were losing anyway, slowly, expensively, in a grinding attritional nightmare that consumed men and machines faster than Germany could replace them. The Allies paid for every mile with blood and burning Shermans, but they had the miles to give. Germany did not. Michael Wittmann arrived in Normandy in June 1944 with heavy SS Panzer Battalion 101, an elite unit equipped with Tiger tanks and crewed by men selected for their combat records and their loyalty to the Nazi regime. Wittmann was already a legend, the most famous tank ace in the Wehrmacht, with 138 confirmed tank kills on the Eastern Front and in Italy. German propaganda celebrated him as the embodiment of Aryan martial superiority, the proof that German armor and German fighting spirit were invincible. He had been awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, one of Nazi Germany's highest military decorations, and his face appeared in newsreels and magazines across occupied Europe. He was 30 years old, calm under fire, tactically brilliant, and utterly committed to the idea that Germany would win the war because men like him would make it impossible for Germany to lose. Wittmann's presence in Normandy raised the stakes for every Allied tank crew in the sector. He was not propaganda. He was real, his record was real, and his kills were documented by German military bureaucracy with obsessive precision. He understood range and angles the way a physicist understands equations. He could identify Allied tank types from their silhouettes at 1,500 meters. He knew how to use terrain to create ambushes that gave his opponents no chance to return fire before they died. His Tiger tank, number 007, was maintained to perfection by a crew who understood that their survival depended on the machine never failing at the critical moment. When Allied intelligence confirmed that Wittmann was operating in the Caen sector, the briefings changed. Commanders warned their men that German armor in this area was not ordinary. Engagement protocols shifted. Caution increased. Nobody wanted to be Michael Wittmann's 139th kill. Radley-Walters did not think about Wittmann. He thought about keeping his men alive. By early August, he had been in combat for 8 weeks, longer than many Sherman commanders survived. Caribou had been hit twice, both times by glancing shots that damaged but did not penetrate. Radley-Walters had learned to read the sounds of battle the way a musician reads sheet music, distinguishing the crack of a German 88 from the lower thump of a 75, knowing instantly whether incoming fire was aimed at his position or at someone else's, understanding when to move and when to stay hidden. His kill count stood at 11 confirmed. 6 Panzer IVs, 3 Panthers killed from flank shots with Firefly support, and 2 Stu-G3 assault guns caught in the open during a German counterattack that collapsed into chaos. 11 kills meant nothing if he died tomorrow. The only number that mattered was staying alive long enough to end the war. Operation Totalize began on August 8, 1944, a massive Allied offensive designed to break through German lines south of Cannes and open the road to Falaise. The attack involved thousands of men, hundreds of tanks, coordinated airstrikes, and artillery bombardments that turned night into day. Radley-Walters received his orders the evening before. Advance to Phase Line 1, secure the crossroads near a chateau designated on maps as Objective Worthington, hold position and provide support for infantry consolidation. The orders were clear. The reality would be chaos. The advance began at midnight under artificial moonlight, searchlights aimed at low clouds to create diffuse illumination that allowed movement without German observers spotting individual targets. Radley-Walters led his squadron in column, Caribou in the lead, 5 tanks following at 50-yard intervals. The night was loud with engine noise and distant explosions. Smoke from burning vehicles mixed with morning mist, reducing visibility to less than 100 yards. Navigation became guesswork. Radio discipline collapsed as units lost contact, reported wrong positions, called for support that never arrived. By dawn, Radley-Walters' squadron had reached what he believed was Objective Worthington, a low hill crowned by the ruins of a stone chateau. But he could not be certain because the landscape looked nothing like the maps, and 3 other Canadian tank units claimed to be at the same objective in different locations 3 miles apart. He positioned his squadron using the chateau as an anchor point, spreading his 5 tanks in a shallow arc facing south and east, the directions from which German counterattacks would come. The Fireflies went into hull-down positions behind rubble piles, only their turrets visible, with clear fields of fire covering the approaches. Standard Shermans took positions slightly forward, ready to engage lighter German armor while the Fireflies remained hidden. Radley-Walters placed Caribou on the left flank where he could observe the entire squadron's front and communicate by radio without exposing himself unnecessarily. Then he waited. The morning wore on. No German counterattack came. Infantry arrived, disorganized and exhausted, and began digging in around the chateau. Artillery fire fell sporadically, distant enough to be ignored, close enough to be concerning. Radley-Walters watched the southern tree-line through binoculars, seeing nothing but shadows and smoke. His gunner cleaned the 75mm gun's breech for the 3rd time. His driver smoked a cigarette and complained about the transmission, which had been making ominous grinding sounds since midnight. The radio crackled with reports that made no sense. Heavy German armor moving north, location uncertain, numbers unknown. All units advised to maintain defensive posture. At 1300 hours, the Tigers appeared. They came from the south, moving in line abreast across open fields, 7 Tigers in formation, their engines audible from a mile away, massive and deliberate and utterly confident. They were not sneaking. They were not using terrain. They were advancing directly toward the chateau like they owned the ground they moved across, because in every previous engagement they had. Tigers did not hide. They did not need to. Their armor was proof against anything the Allies could throw at them, or so German doctrine assumed. Radley-Walters felt his heartbeat slow, the way it always did when combat became imminent. Time compressed. Details became sharp. He could see the Tiger commanders standing in their cupola hatches, scanning for targets, their black uniforms distinct against the gray steel of their machines. Range was approximately 800 yards, too far for his 75mm gun, perfect range for a Firefly. He keyed his radio and spoke 4 words. Fireflies hold and wait. The Tigers advanced. 700 yards. 600. Their turrets traversed slowly, methodically, searching. They had not identified the Allied positions yet, or they would have stopped and engaged from range. Radley-Walters understood what was happening. The Tigers expected the Allies to run or to open fire prematurely, revealing their positions and dying in the next 30 seconds. German tank doctrine relied on this pattern. Allied crews panicked when they saw Tigers. They fired too early from too far away, wasted their ammunition, and then died when the Tigers closed the distance and killed them with aimed shots. Radley-Walters did not panic. He had fought Germans for 8 weeks and learned their rhythms. He knew the Tigers were looking for movement, for muzzle flash, for any indication of where to fire. So he gave them nothing. His entire squadron remained silent and still. The Tigers continued forward. 500 yards. 450. At 400 yards, Radley-Walters spoke into his radio. Firefly 3, engage lead tank. The 17-pounder fired with a sound like a steel door slamming. The armor-piercing round crossed 400 yards in less than a second and struck Tiger 007 on the frontal glacis plate at a slight angle. The penetration was catastrophic. The Tiger stopped moving instantly, smoke pouring from hatches, fire visible inside the crew compartment. No one bailed out. The crew either died from the impact or from the fire that followed, impossible to know which, irrelevant in the end. The other 6 Tigers stopped advancing. Their turrets traversed frantically, trying to identify where the shot had come from. Radley-Walters had positioned his Firefly behind rubble with a narrow firing lane, and the German commanders could not locate it immediately. That confusion gave him 3 seconds. He used them. Firefly 2, engage rightmost tank. All units prepare to engage on my command. Firefly 2 fired. Another Tiger took a hit, this one on the turret ring, the round punching through the thinner armor where turret met hull. The Tiger's gun drooped, its hydraulics dead. It began reversing, damaged but mobile, its crew still fighting but blind. Now the Germans knew where the Fireflies were. The 5 remaining operational Tigers opened fire simultaneously, high-explosive and armor-piercing rounds screaming toward the chateau. One round struck the rubble pile sheltering Firefly 3, showering the tank with stone fragments but causing no damage. Another round hit the chateau wall and detonated, collapsing a section of masonry. The noise was apocalyptic. Dust and smoke filled the air. Radley-Walters could see nothing through his periscope except gray haze. He gave the next order: all units engage. Fire at will. His entire squadron opened fire. The standard Shermans had no hope of penetrating Tiger frontal armor, but they did not need to. They fired at tracks, at vision ports, at cupola hatches, forcing German commanders to button up, to close their hatches and rely on periscopes, reducing their situational awareness. The Tigers returned fire, but their advantage had evaporated. At 400 yards, dug in, using terrain and crossfire, the Shermans had turned the engagement into a knife fight, and in a knife fight, numbers mattered more than armor. Firefly 2 fired again. A third Tiger stopped moving, its engine dead from a penetrating shot through the rear deck. The crew bailed out and ran for the treeline. German machine gun fire from infantry positions tried to suppress the Allied tanks, but the Canadian infantry returned fire with mortars and rifle grenades, forcing the German infantry to ground. The remaining Tigers began withdrawing, reversing at speed, firing as they moved. One Sherman took a direct hit and exploded, its ammunition cooking off in a chain reaction that tore the tank apart. Another Sherman lost a track to a near miss and sat immobile, its crew evacuating while machine gun fire kicked up dirt around them. But the Germans were retreating, and that meant the engagement was over. You could not win a tank battle while reversing. You could only survive long enough to break contact and regroup. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 3 Tigers sat dead on the field. One was still burning, the crew's fate unknown and unimportant. A 4th Tiger was damaged and abandoned, its crew gone. The other 3 had withdrawn, their combat effectiveness unknown but certainly reduced. The cost to Radley-Walters' squadron: 1 Sherman destroyed, 1 damaged, 3 men dead, 2 wounded. By the standards of armored combat in Normandy, this was a victory. Lopsided, decisive, attributable entirely to tactics and terrain and patience. Radley-Walters climbed out of Caribou after the firing stopped. His legs felt unsteady, adrenaline leaving his system in waves. He walked toward the burning Tiger, the one his Firefly had killed first. The smoke was thick and toxic, burning rubber and diesel and something worse, something organic. He stopped 20 yards away. The Tiger's identification number was visible on the turret, 007. He did not know what that meant. He did not know whose tank it was. German prisoners would be interrogated. Intelligence reports would be filed. Someone would figure out which unit had attacked and who had commanded it. But that would come later, if ever. What mattered now was that the Tiger was dead and his men were alive and the line had held. Nothing else registered. Radley-Walters walked back to Caribou, climbed in, and reported to regimental command that Objective Worthington was secure and all enemy armor had withdrawn. He did not mention the specific Tiger destroyed. He did not request confirmation of kills. He did not seek credit. The battle was over. The war continued. That was sufficient. He would learn later, weeks later, perhaps months later, that Tiger 007 had belonged to Michael Wittmann. That the most famous tank ace in the German military had died in the opening seconds of the engagement, killed by a 17-pounder round fired from a Firefly under Radley-Walters' command. German propaganda never mentioned Wittmann's death, not publicly, because admitting that their invincible hero had been destroyed by Allied tanks would damage morale. The SS held a private ceremony. Wittmann received posthumous honors. His name entered the mythology of Nazi martyrdom, another hero fallen in service to the Reich. Radley-Walters never claimed to have killed Wittmann. When asked directly in later years, he confirmed that his squadron destroyed Tiger 007 during Operation Totalize and that he learned afterward who had been inside. But he refused to take personal credit. The Firefly's gunner pulled the trigger. The loader loaded the round. The driver positioned the tank. The commander gave the order. 5 men worked together to kill that Tiger. Which of them deserved credit? All of them. None of them. It did not matter because Wittmann was simply another target, more dangerous than most, less dangerous than survival required believing. Treating him as special would be allowing German propaganda to work even in defeat. The war ground forward. Radley-Walters fought through France, through Belgium, through Holland, through Germany itself. He killed more tanks. A Panther ambushed at dawn near Falaise. 2 Panzer IVs destroyed in a running battle outside Antwerp. A Stoogie 3 caught retreating across open ground. Others he could not remember clearly because exhaustion and repetition blurred them together. He was wounded twice, once by shrapnel from an artillery near-miss that left his left arm temporarily useless, once by a sniper's bullet that grazed his shoulder and convinced him that German infantry hated tank commanders more than they hated the tanks themselves. He had 3 more Shermans destroyed under him. 1 hit by a Panzerfaust, the crew escaping with burns and broken bones. 1 disabled by a mine, the driver losing his legs below the knee. 1 brewed up after taking an 88mm round through the engine deck, the crew evacuating through flames that singed off their hair and eyebrows but left them alive. His final confirmed kill count reached 18. 18 German tanks destroyed under his command, verified by witnesses, documented in after-action reports, each one representing a calculus of range and angles and timing that could have gone wrong in 1,000 ways and ended with his death instead. 18 kills made him the highest-scoring Allied tank commander of the Second World War, a distinction that appears in historical records without fanfare, a footnote in broader narratives about armored warfare and strategic victory. The war ended in May 1945. Radley-Walters returned to Canada, resumed his military career, rose through the ranks with the methodical competence that had kept him alive in Normandy. He commanded armored units during the Cold War, trained new generations of tank officers, served in NATO positions that required diplomatic skill as much as military expertise. He retired as a brigadier general, decorated with the Distinguished Service Order, the Military Cross, multiple mentions in dispatches, honors from Canada and Britain and France. He died in March 2012 at age 91. Having outlived the war by 67 years, having seen the Sherman tank become a museum piece and the Tiger become a symbol of mechanical over-engineering and strategic futility. His obituaries mentioned his service. Some noted his kill count. Few explained what that meant, what it required, how a 24-year-old with no combat experience learned to kill German tanks before they killed him. Fewer still mention Michael Wittmann because Radley-Walters never emphasized it, never claimed it as his defining achievement, never allowed his legacy to be built on the death of one German officer no matter how famous that officer had been. And this is why his name remains largely unknown outside military history circles, why students learning about World War II memorize Patton and Rommel and Montgomery but not Radley-Walters. He did not seek fame. He did not write memoirs glorifying his exploits. He did not appear in documentary films explaining how brilliant his tactics were. He simply did the job he was ordered to do, survived when most men in his position did not, and went home when the war ended. That humility, that refusal to mythologize his own experience, meant history forgot him in favor of more dramatic personalities who understood that wars create reputations as surely as they create casualties. But the mathematics remain. 18 confirmed kills. Months of combat in a Sherman tank, which Allied crews called a rolling coffin. Survival through tactical intelligence when brute force would have meant death. Leadership that kept men alive in circumstances designed to kill them. These facts do not require exaggeration or embellishment. They stand alone, testimony to what is possible when intelligence and courage combine under impossible conditions. The Sherman versus the Tiger was never a fair fight. The Tiger had better armor, better guns, better optics, better everything except availability. Germany could not produce enough Tigers to matter strategically. The Allies could produce enough Shermans to absorb catastrophic losses and continue fighting. This was the calculus that won the war. Not tactical brilliance but industrial capacity, not superior equipment but superior logistics, not better soldiers but more soldiers willing to climb into machines that burned when hit and fight anyway because the alternative was allowing Nazi Germany to continue existing. Sydney Radley-Walters understood this calculus and transcended it. He found ways to win engagements that doctrine said were unwinnable. He survived battles that killed men just as skilled and just as brave. He killed Michael Wittmann not through superior equipment or numerical advantage but through patience and positioning and the willingness to let the enemy commit before revealing where his forces actually were. That engagement at the chateau near Cannes was not luck. It was preparation meeting opportunity, a young commander applying lessons learned through watching men die and understanding that their deaths taught him how to keep others alive. This is the story that should be taught alongside the grand narratives of D-Day and Market Garden and the Battle of the Bulge. Not because it is more important but because it is more human, more comprehensible, more applicable to understanding how wars are actually fought by the men inside the machines. Sydney Radley-Walters was not a superhero. He was not invincible. He was terrified and exhausted and wounded and lucky, and he used all of those things to become better at killing German tanks than anyone else on the Allied side managed to achieve. His story matters because it reminds us that war is not decided by equipment specifications or propaganda legends. It is decided by young men making split-second decisions inside steel boxes while other young men try to kill them, and the ones who survive are not always the ones with the best equipment or the most experience. Sometimes they are simply the ones who think faster, who refuse to panic, who understand that survival requires adaptation and that adaptation requires learning from every engagement, every mistake, every death. Normandy killed thousands of tank crews. The Hedgerows and the Tigers and the 88s and the Panzerfausts turned the Norman countryside into a graveyard for Shermans and the men who crewed them. Sydney Radley-Walters climbed out of that graveyard, brought his men out with him as often as humanly possible, and killed more German tanks than any other Allied commander managed to kill in 5 years of war. That achievement deserves recognition, not for purposes of glorification but for purposes of understanding what courage actually looks like when stripped of mythology and examined in the cold light of historical record. He was not a legend. He was a major in the Canadian Army who learned his trade in the worst school imaginable and graduated by staying alive. His legacy is not in statues or films or popular memory. It is in the men who came home because he made decisions that kept them alive, in the lessons learned about armored warfare that influenced tank doctrine for decades afterward, in the quiet knowledge that when it mattered most, under conditions designed to kill him, he found a way to win. If you found the story compelling, if you learned something about armored warfare or about the men who fought in Normandy or about Sydney Radley-Walters himself, consider subscribing to this channel for more untold stories from World War II. Hit the like button if this video changed your understanding of tank combat or made you appreciate the cost of victory in Europe. And leave a comment below. Had you heard of Sydney Radley-Walters before today? Do you think his story deserves wider recognition? Or is there value in military excellence that remains deliberately humble? I want to know what you think about this forgotten ace and whether stories like his matter in how we remember the war.